So, without further ado, I'm going to start with an introduction. Matt, please join me. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Sam. Right, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. And a big thank you to David. Good timing on the conference, well done. It's nicely done. And a big tribute, I suppose, to everything you do. A very different organisation to the rest of the housing and homelessness world. And what you do is inspire people. What you do is lift the art of the possible, and that's really, really vital. I particularly love the work on Eastern Europe at the moment that's being done at World Habitat. I think it's fantastic. And I think around about 10 years ago, I went on a study visit to Helsinki that changed my life, professional life at least, changed my life. And I saw the art of the possible. I saw what really can be done. And that was only possible because of what your organisation did and what it recognised. So my brief today was and is, I think, ahead of the government in this country producing a new homelessness strategy to sort of say what should be in it. And so I'm going to do that really quickly and move on to some other stuff, if that's all right. So in summary, I think what I've learned needs to be in a homelessness strategy is, A, prevention services where we know homelessness is coming. So hospitals, prisons, the care system, refugee and asylum. A sufficient welfare safety net for where we don't know it's coming from and to make sure that nobody falls into homelessness. Enough social housing to go round to meet current need and particularly future need, and to allow us to stop using temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation, hostels, and the support services to keep people housed. Basically, that's it, I think. And there are some details to it, and it's hard, but I think that's basically it. So what I'd like to do instead is go a little bit off topic and talk about some of the things that are less likely to be confronted in political cycles and in our conversations, but are actually the things that hold us back and hold us back from the kind of even the best of political intentions. I warn you, this may contain provocations. I hope that's all right, and I hope that's kind of what I'm here for. So if you get a little bit annoyed, that's why. So I'd like to start with the question of vision and aspiration on housing and homelessness. Last week, I was contacted by somebody asking for advice and assistance, really, really desperate. She's a mum of 2 kids. She's a chartered surveyor, runs her own firm. Her husband is a mechanic. They have 2 children. They're age 9 and they're age 15, and they're currently living in a tent. The older child, on the day that the mum contacted me, was doing her GCSE maths exam, having slept in a tent the night before and that night. The council had told them that there's nothing that they can do for this family. Now, does anyone want to take a guess as to why on earth a council would say that, or how on earth they can possibly say that? Go on. They're not migrants, but that's a very good guess. Intentionally homeless. Hi, Joe. So the technical reason for me is that they lost, well, the technical reason that was explained to me is that they had lost their home and they'd gone into temporary accommodation provided by the council. That temporary accommodation was an office block. It was 1 room in an office block. And that's where all of the family were living. And around them in the corridors was mayhem. And in particular, the 15-year-old girl had been subject to abuse and violence. And so the mother had taken the logical decision to say, that's it, we're no longer living here. We're going back to the council and we're going to ask for something else. Upon which, obviously, as you now heard, the council say to them, well, actually, you've had a reasonable offer and you've made yourselves intentionally homeless. Our duty to you ends today. You get nothing. So I could tell you why that's wrong. I could tell you why technically that shouldn't be the case, where social services should have stepped in. So I can tell you the technical reasons, but actually for me the real reason is that in this country we haven't decided whether we want a universal system of help, a targeted system of help, or no system of help whatsoever. We haven't actually decided. Citizens becoming homeless, citizens needing a home, is no less fundamental to human life than education, or health is. But you don't see schools or hospitals acting in this way. Who is it that protests when a local housing options service goes completely online or telephone only and becomes completely inaccessible? No one does. Nye Bevan in 1948 was completely unequivocal when he said he wanted the NHS to be open to all and free at the point of use. But we still haven't decided what our vision for housing is. We still don't know, and the people delivering our system don't know what the underlying value system and vision of that system is. So this time round, is it too much to ask our political class to take a view and to give us a view that we want a country where everyone has somewhere to call home? Allied to that, we haven't decided whether people actually deserve help. Yesterday I was up in Newcastle and I met a guy who uses our services. He's a long-term rough sleeper in the city, well known. He's in his early 30s, but physically you wouldn't see that, you wouldn't know it. He walks with a limp. His face shows the scars of years of abuse and violence. A couple of years ago, after years of hell in his own life, he was told by his counsel that, congratulations, you have made it to being complicated and ill enough to be considered a priority case to be assisted by your counsel. But the sting in the tail is, I'm afraid that, I need to read this because he said it to me and I need to get it right. He was told that his needs were too high for him to be accommodated safely in any housing, any temporary accommodation or homelessness project commissioned by the local authority. So congratulations, you're deserving enough, but you get nothing. Now, the good news in this case is the man in question is supported by our Housing First team. And guess what? With the right support, it turns out his needs aren't too high. Guess what? He's been in his own flat for 6 months now and is no longer homeless. So yes, his story is a snapshot of the homelessness system, the kind of tightrope of eligibility and exclusion that so many people have to walk. But probably not really. I think his story is actually about his face not fitting from the very start. I think it's actually about the fact that he never stood a chance in our homelessness system. He was far too easy to exclude. In December, you might remember that Elon Musk put a tweet out saying, there's no such thing as homelessness. It's just criminals and addicts who are gaming the system. Now, we can and we should be outraged by that, obviously, but arguably, we live in a discriminatory system that perpetuates elements of that view every day. Until we don't. To me, homelessness only ends when we consider everyone as equally deserving of help. Obviously, there are different support needs for different people, but until everyone is included in solutions, it's logically impossible to have a successful homelessness strategy. Second, our housing system, I would argue, has grown apart from its yearning cousin, which is the homelessness system. Around the corner from our office in East London is a lovely new mixed tenure housing block. There's some social housing, there's some market housing, great stuff. On the door of a side door, there's a glass panel, and on the sign it reads, "Please be aware that homeless people are trying to get into the building. Kindly close the door firmly behind you." Where once the housing movement and its founding organisations were established to solve homelessness, now we've got to admit, and if we don't admit it, we won't move forward, that the vast majority of our landlords, both social and private, either cannot or will not house people out of homelessness. We know this in our services up and down the country. Every year it gets harder to persuade people to rehouse people or to stop them evicting other people. That's why, together with Homes for Good, obviously a wonderful World Habitat Award winner, we've established Good Place Lettings in East London. There's a man up there called Ben. Can you stand up and put your hand up, Ben? Ben is the director of Good Place Lettings in East London, whose job it is to work with landlords to make sure they get the deal they need and we can get some people out of homelessness. That's a wonderful initiative that really is possible because of Susan and Homes for Good, but is only needed because we cannot find housing for anybody. In social housing, we've got to confront the fact that allocations to homeless households are ridiculously low. In England, at 27%, we have half the rate of allocations to homeless households than in Scotland. 27% of the very sector that was set up to resolve homelessness is available to people leaving homelessness. And the barriers keep going up and up. Affordability tests for social housing. They now mean that people in our services are routinely found to be too poor for social housing. Conceptually, can you get your head around that? Because I can't. Of course, there are good reasons for some of this. In the funding and support environment providers operate in, of course there are. But let's be honest about it. We no longer have a housing system that's fit for ending homelessness. And the strategy has to sort that out. And actually, in a world of different government strategies, I would definitely swap a good housing strategy for a good homelessness strategy. And ideally, all you need is a housing strategy whose aim it is to solve homelessness. I guess the good news, as Adam said, is that yesterday, £39 billion was announced for housing supply in this country. So I think it's time. I think it's time for the housing sector, for developers, for providers, frankly, to get going on ending homelessness. I think there have been very good reasons why there are limitations for many, many years. The money's now in the system. It's game time. Let's work together to do this and work as one, as housing and homelessness together. And speaking of sharing the job of ending homelessness, it's a funny thing, particularly when you're in an international audience, to reflect on how kind of weirdly dominant local authorities are, particularly in England, in their role in tackling homelessness. And it sort of leaves the rest of the state and actually other actors kind of outside of a tent which is only of theirs. And I think we forget sometimes that the vast majority of people who are at risk of homelessness don't ever experience it. And the reason they don't isn't because of a brilliant homelessness application to a council. It's because they've got the social or financial capital to avoid it in the first place. So to me, the test of a really fantastically joined up homelessness strategy that's not just about policy is whether we can recreate some of those conditions, the sorts of people, institutions that people rely on in everyday life. So what else can be unlocked, I guess, is the question. I'll give you one example. A few years back, we did a survey of employers across the country, and we asked HR teams, so the personnel teams in employers, from massive organisations down to small and medium businesses, what would you do if somebody comes to you and they're experiencing homelessness? What do you want to know, and what action would you take? So most people said, actually, I haven't a clue. I don't know what we would do in that situation. Is there anything out there that could help us? When asked the question, what would you do if the person is homeless now? 42% of employers said they would dismiss. So, to me, if we can take on that quite shocking information and turn it around, what we actually have is a massive opportunity to prevent and end homelessness amongst employers in this country. We've launched something called the Homelessness Alliance, which is exactly that. So, I've said this story before to one or two of you, but a few weeks ago I was at an event, a business event in South London, and one of the businesses said, this is all very well and good, but there's someone sleeping in the underpass and that's stopping people coming through to the shops, and we've seen it hit our business. Matt, what can be done about this? So I said to them, what can be done about it is you pay your staff well enough, and if they need help preventing homelessness, you sort it out. That's the answer. And actually, when you get under the skin of it, and we are working with Amazon, Lloyds Banking Group, all sorts of other people, people do want to do it, and they do want to have organisations that are helping their employee and their staff base when they're in trouble. So sometimes I think the imagination of how we tackle homelessness needs to go outside of the traditional boundaries of state intervention. Finally, what about us as the homelessness sector? What are the things that we need to confront that stand in our way? And when people come in the future to judge us, what will they say? Or even from the past. A couple of years ago, we held a celebration for a founder of Crisis, a wonderful man called Nick, who had been part of sorting the establishment of the organisation in the 60s. We had a wonderful event of all the people that were still alive and were involved at that time. They came to Crisis. The scene was extraordinary, like a sort of army of people with mobility issues, but fire in their eyes. And one after another, they spoke about what it was they'd done at the time. So not just founding Crisis, but lots of other organisations. In fact, scraping around for the money to set up, to buy a few homes and establish organisations that in some cases are now giant housing associations, not housing people who are homeless. In lots of examples, people who were the actual forefathers and the people who achieved the first political changes on homelessness. So this is all really nice, and I'm being very feeling very privileged to be there. But then something happens in the event where all of them, in one way or another, start saying, "Have you not noticed things are worse now than they were then? Where the hell is your energy? Where the hell is your outrage? Where the hell is your organisation? Where are the human stories? Why have you professionalised so much at the expense of actually getting out there and achieving change?" And my God, what a thing to hear. And I'm afraid the only person I think that meets that test actually is Kwejo. And there is a job to do in our sector. It's now game time for us as well. I don't think it's just about outrage. I think it's about positive, proactive solutions. There's plenty of evidence now. We don't need any more. I think we just need to get on with what we know needs to be done. But I think it's a really good challenge that we must rise to, whoever we are. So yes, we've got to confront the deep apathy and discrimination and pessimism that exists in our housing and homelessness system. We cannot expect a vision on housing and homelessness from our political masters unless we give it to them. So what is it? And we must get rid of the ridiculous exclusions that inevitably create and sustain homelessness. And we must insist our housing system and our housing institutions are ours. And if they're not here to end homelessness, what are they here for? So we don't need to argue about whether there's a problem. We don't need to convince anyone that homelessness is a bad thing. All we need to do is start acting as if the future is here now. As somebody put it, if you want to change the future, start living as if you are already there. Thank you.